Well, for the next video, we're going to move back to a game system other than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. And I wanted to preface the video then by saying that while the majority of my content is always going to be sort of geared towards system agnostic discussion about role playing games, um, or if it is system specific, a lot of it's going to be geared towards Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, and that's always going to be the case. But there are a number of other systems that I really like. Some of those just aren't really reasonable to do videos about because there's really no expectation that people are going to hunt down these out of print materials for which there was never a lot of supplemental information. So chances are I could do a video about them and no one really is going to care. However, this game, Daredevils, is an example where the system is still available from the publisher. You can buy the box set for $15 plus $3 shipping. Now, as I understand it from the previous unboxing video, which I'll link to down in the description below, they don't ship internationally, so people who are interested in the game but living in Europe or otherwise outside of the United States have not been able to obtain the box set directly from the publisher. But I believe you should still be able to buy the PDF in a few different ways too. However, I would highly recommend this system. And because of that, we're going to talk about it in several installments that will hopefully lead to doing an actual play or more than one actual play. Now, the game system is Daredevils, and it's from Fantasy Games Unlimited. And it is meant to run pulp adventures set in roughly the 1930s. Now, it can do everything from turn of the century to about 1960. It would probably be best for, let's say, roughly the 1910s to the 1950s, and ideally you'll pick a starting point within the 1930s and run it from there. Now, these kinds of adventures might not be to everyone's taste or in the forefront of everyone's knowledge about fantasy game kind of settings and systems. And so there's some materials that you can look for depending on how you want to run it. Obviously, one comparable game would be Call of Cthulhu, which is generally set in the 20s. And you can, with Daredevils, run those kind of supernatural, occult, detective style mysteries. In fact, there are some alternate rules that add even more kind of quasi magical powers to the system if you desire that. I would say, though, that the system is geared towards uh, more mundane heroics in the sense that you're generally not operating a super powered hero of any form. These are just regular people in the regular world confronted by occasionally paranormal type mysteries, but also just regular crimes. So the serials of the 1930s are a great source of information about the period and also the type of adventure that you would play using the Daredevil system primarily. And I think probably the one I would recommend if you're only going to watch one 1930s period serial, I would say check out The Mysterious Dr. Satan. Now, unlike what you might expect from the name, there are no occult or religious dimensions to the story at all. If anything, the titular character of Dr. Satan is more of a mad scientist, kind of evil villain who's working on building a robot and that sort of thing. So I mentioned it because tonally it hits all the notes that you would expect from a 1930s pulp serial. It also kind of gives you an idea about the types of technology that you might, or the levels of technology that you might be able to introduce in the stories that you create on your own. As far as things like TV shows, um, Tales from the Gold Monkey and Bring Them Back Alive are both great examples of 30s pulp. In terms of movies, there's a lot of like hard boiled detective films that were actually books originally. So if you're into the books or the movies, you can check out Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler. Some of the best known being for Dashiell Hammett, probably The Maltese Falcon. You can watch the movie starring Humphrey Bogart. That's a great bit of source material to kind of give you the tone and vibe of 30s pulp fiction. The Big Sleep of Raymond Chandler was also a great novel and made into a film. But that's generally the kind of materials that you would want to look into to get yourself prepared for this sort of game. And also probably some light historical reading if you're not really that familiar with the 1930s, just to give you an idea of what the level of like aircraft and automobiles and that sort of thing were like in the 30s. You may have seen pictures of them, but you don't know how durable, how much flight time, how much gas they consume, that sort of thing. Now, of course, that will all be addressed in rules for a game, so you don't have to worry that much about it, but just to give yourself a feeling for the world at that time. So what we want to do today is just focus on making up a character. And I want to do this because, one, I want people to think about making up their own characters so that when we get down the road, we can actually do this as an actual play and kind of perhaps play online. But also, it showcases some aspects of the rules that I find I like very much. And in fact, when I thought about making my own game, I incorporated not the rules so much directly, but the thought process behind how to break down the sort of attributes, talents, and skills system that they use, and kind of my own permutation of attributes, knowledge, and skills is what I ended up using. And so it'd be the AXE system or ASK system, depending on how you arrange it. Um, but what would you do in the future episodes then is probably look at I think next time we'll go over time and the types of actions and how to run combat. And then probably after that, we'll do a general wrap up and then maybe think about, like I said, playing online. So let's jump right into making a character. Rather than try and roll up a character on screen, I think what I'm going to do is just go over the different elements of the character sheet, and then we can go back and take a look at a character that I rolled up earlier today, and then you'll know where I got the different information from, and we can talk about it in a little greater detail, put it on camera that way. So where we want to start is with the determination of attributes, and these are going to be attributes very similar to the ones that you're used to with a game like Dungeons and Dragons. In this case, they're using wit, will, strength, deafness, speed, and health. Wit is not your character's intelligence per se, but its ability to learn, so how rapidly and how well it takes in new information and can apply it to situations after that. Will is sort of your mental fortitude, powers of persuasion. Strength is your physical strength. Deafness will be your manual dexterity and sort of reaction speed, whereas agility is more of a measure of your character's ability to move their body in space, but also the kind of rapidity of actions that the character makes and overland travel speed kind of thing. And then the last is health, and that's going to be very much like what you're used to as the Constitution score from Dungeons and Dragons, except in this case it actually is kind of the major basis of what you might think of as this game's version of hit points. And also kind of how fast your character can recuperate from diseases and injuries and that sort of thing, and susceptibility to things like diseases. The next thing that we'll look at will be the talent system. And here's a case where you'll notice I'm sort of uneven in terms of the book, where I'm going over some things that are listed as optional or advanced in more detail, whereas other things that are optional or advanced we'll kind of just mention and move on. And I'm trying to, as best as possible, just stick to the things that I would actually use in a game. That way, if we get it to a point where we're making characters to try to apply to an online actual play, that we're just kind of focused on the things that you'll need to do the character at that point. So talents are listed as an optional part of the character sheet. However, you notice on the sheet itself, it takes up a pretty substantial portion, and it's a pretty useful kind of baseline stat. That if you don't have a particular skill, you can at least have this sort of minimal capacity within these different areas. So let's take a look at the different areas. We have charismatic, combative, communicative, aesthetic, mechanical, natural, and scientific. And so they're more or less what you would expect, with charismatic coming down to your ability to lead others and be persuasive in your speech and that sort of thing. Combative is just general aggressiveness, your will to win, but it also has everything to do with your raw fighting ability. Communicative covers your faculty with languages and also your general ability to communicate ideas with other people. Aesthetic is your appreciation of and performance of artistic endeavors. Mechanical is your affinity for technology and its products. Natural is your affinity for the natural environment. And scientific is your capacity for your reasoned analysis and also your perceptions of causes and effects. And you will roll first a die 10 for each one of those talent areas. And based on that die 10 roll, then you'll go anywhere from sort of a -2 to a +3 from low to high rolls. And that'll be a modifier for your permanent score. And then you will roll a 2 die 6 and add 20 to that, and that will be your starting number of talent points. You can fill them out as you wish, and then you will modify them, or you will take into account that each score might have a modifier to it. So if you know you're going to lose a point, you may want to put an extra point of what you've rolled into it. Kind of similarly, didn't mention it before, but with the attributes, it's more or less a point buy system. So you're going to start with 75 points that you can distribute between all of the attributes, and as I mentioned earlier, the human range is from 1 to 40. So clearly you're not going to get that close to 40 on 6 attributes and a 75 point ability to purchase them. And we'll get to that because you will also, based on the next thing that we've got to do, we'll talk about rolling for your age. And that's going to be a 4 die 10 plus 12 roll. And for each year of your age, you will get what is called a development point. And with each development point, you can do one of 3 things. You can purchase an initial score in a skill. And we'll get to the point where we'll talk about how the initial score is calculated. If you already have an initial score in that skill, then you can buy an enhancement to that skill. It's a single increase, and the increase will be the result of a 2 die 6 roll. So from 2 to 12 points you'll get added, and you can use your points however you want. So if you want to buy 2 or 3 times the improvement, you can do that. The other thing that you can do with these development points that come from whatever your age is at the beginning is to purchase increases to your attributes. and that is a 1 die 3 roll. So you'll roll a 6-sided die. 1 to 2 will be 1. 3 to 4 will be 2, 5 to 6 will be 3, and then you can add those points then to your skills. And the way it actually works out is you just sort of you have rolled then to find out your age. You've got your number of development points. You know how you're going to want to spend them, so you just off the top you go, well, I'm going to reserve, in the case of the character of the sheet that we'll look at, I took 6 points and reserve them for additional attribute scores, and then the remaining 20 points that I had to my disposal, I'm age 26, I went ahead and put into various skills. And so we've got a couple of then abilities that we'll talk about real fast that come in handy, and they are a little different than what you might find in Dungeons & Dragons. So the first one is the Combat Dodge ability, and this is more or less your basic defensive statistic. You'll see that you can buy some clothing that functions with an armor value, like being able to, purchase a leather bomber jacket will give you some additional protection sort of thing. And there's, you can also buy a bulletproof vest, although they won't be Kevlar in the 1930s. They'd be like lead plates, so it would be a fairly heavy vest. But you can buy extra defense that way. But your combat dodge ability is produced by looking at your grouping of skills, and this is something that we haven't mentioned with attributes. We'll take a look at it when we get on screen so you can actually see the range, but it boils down to a particular range of attribute numbers are then put together in a group, and there are groupings from 0 to 8. However, again, since the maximum human score is 40, then the reality is that for typical humans, you would not have a 0 because then you're non-functional in that attribute. So you can count on your group number going to be somewhere between 1 to 5 typically. In my case, I allocated points in such a way that my deftness group was 3 and my speed group was 3, and those numbers are divided by 2 to give me a 3, and that's my combat dodge ability. And we'll talk about in the next video about how to attack and how to defend, or what reduces our damage resistance total, which is the next ability. Think of this like hit points, and that number is derived from your full health attribute plus your strength attribute divided by 2, plus your will attribute divided by 2. And in my case, then that leads to a damage resistant total of 34 points. And we will derive some numbers from there with lethal damage, subdual damage, critical damage. But then the next area that's covered under abilities will also be your encumbrance capacity. And this is listed as 5 plus your strength's attribute saving throw in kilograms weight. If you're not used to using kilograms, you can of course use an online converter to convert to pounds or whatever your preferred measurement statistic would be. But just to go back again to attributes and the attribute and saving throws. So again, our ranges between 1 to 40. We have as our attribute saving throw, which would be the more commonly used one, will be your attribute divided by 2. And then your critical saving throw will be your attribute, again, each one individually, divided by 3. And this will produce a fairly low number. However, you won't use that critical saving throw quite as often. So then we go through, we find we have the freely improvable skills talked about in the attributes area. That is based off your wit and your will attributes added together. This isn't necessarily going to be the the stats that you, or the skills that you first declare an initial skill in. However, if you make an improvement to a skill, then it definitely counts against your freely improvable skills. So you would underline it or give it a little star or whatever that you declared it one of your freely improvable skills. And when you get to your maximum number, then after that, it basically becomes you can still improve different skills that aren't in your freely improvable area, but it costs twice as much, and there's some other potential for penalties within there. And then the final statistic we'll talk about in the abilities will be the offhand dexterity. And so there is a handedness to your character. They recommend that you whatever your handedness would be, that your character would use that too. It's something, though, that can be improved through study and training on downtime between adventures, just like any other skill could be, so that you can improve your offhand dexterity. Initially, it will be your wit plus your will plus your deftness divided by 6. In my particular case, that's giving me an 8 offhand dexterity. So if I had an injury to my main hand, and we'll say my basic chance of success was 12 on my main hand, if my offhand dexterity is 8, then I will get an average between the two as my ability to do things with the left hand usually, and that will be like 10. So if I was shooting with my right hand, I might have a 12 basic chance of success out of 20. If I'm shooting with my left hand, then in that case I only have a 10. The restriction on it is you can't get better than your good hand with by improving your offhand dexterity. The maximum would be you could get just as good with your offhand as with your primary hand. And so then the last thing we'll talk about is the skills, and there we'll probably take a look at the individual skills that I purchased and how you calculate that. But just to kind of talk about the skills themselves, I'll put up on the screen here the basic categories of skill. So there are practical skills, and these are generally going to be things that you want to do and will immediately find out whether you're successful or not by rolling a die. There's also the task skills, and we'll talk a little bit about the task system. These are things that probably go on for a longer amount of time. And in fact, that's something that your game master will set as far as you declare what you want to do. They'll give you a time interval and a time value and potentially a difficulty number. Now, if your basic chance of success is not higher than the difficulty, then you're not going to be able to do it. However, typically difficulty is just something that would be deducted from your base chance of success, and it's most times you're probably going to get to attempt things, and it would have to be something if you were an old carrot farmer off the farm and you had to do some nuclear physics, you might not have a starting point on that kind of thing. But if not, then you at least recognize the machines sort of thing. You could at least make an attempt to use your base talents, even if you didn't have a skill in something, in order to be able to do something that your character needed to do. So that task period, the interval, then every time a certain amount of time passes, you'll get a chance to roll. Assuming you are successful, the difference between the number that was required and the number you rolled would be deducted from the task value, which is just points that are set by the dungeon master, not arbitrarily, but it's based on what you declare that you want to do and how complicated they're estimating it to be. You can probably negotiate to a certain extent with that, but for the most part, your GM's going to be fair and balanced. If it doesn't seem like they are, then you can question it, but otherwise you probably just want to go with it and move on along. So then the other skills that we have there, as you'll see, are the knowledge skills, and these are things like major areas of knowledge. A lot of them would be like academic disciplines, and even some medical training up to advanced medical training, and even specializations like surgery and that sort of thing. So if you were playing a doctor, you might be able to perform surgery on somebody that was injured. Um, and then also we have the culture skills, which are basically the broad cultural information about each particular group for each group that you choose to have to specialize in. That's a separate skill declaration. We also have the subculture skills, which would again you have to take them individually for each culture, but it would give you something Uh, that's more attuned to specific areas of the culture, or something specific to socioeconomic strata within a culture. So you might have insights and connections in the academic world, or the criminal underworld, or in law enforcement, or in high society. And then the last kind of three sections of skills are pretty obvious. Firearm skills is one. Armed combat skills is another. That would include, knife, billy club, whip, if you want to be Indiana Jones, and then unarmed skills, which obviously is it really breaks down to either brawling or martial arts. Brawling being still semi-organized kind of fighting, but not with necessarily the same level of specialization as having exposure to Eastern style martial arts or some other form of martial arts, if you wanted to declare that. And so now I think what we'll do is go to the camera and take a look at how I actually filled out this section. So I realize that to some extent this can all just sound like a lot of word salad and game jargon and random numbers that really don't seem to attach to anything because you're not familiar with the game. And so what we want to do is just kind of talk a little bit more about where various numbers came from. So just as an idea, so I started my 75 point by just writing the numbers on the left side of the column, knowing that I would change all these numbers later. And then I went to the talent section and I rolled my 1 die 10 for each for each talent major category, and got my psychological profile. And so you can see I had a couple of negative ones. So for when I assigned my numbers, I had to deduct 1 point there, but I got to add 3 points on like my combative, and I had a couple of plus ones and a couple of zeros in there too. And so here's a little bit about then what these numbers can do. Um, I've come up then with my permanent totals. And so if I don't have a skill in the particular area that's governed by this kind of talent major category, whether it's charismatic or combative, communicative, aesthetic, mechanical, natural, or scientific, and my back's against the wall. It's not something that you would always use, but I at least have a minimum number that I could actually use. So that I think in the booklet, the example is if a character gets stuck in an elevator, they might be able to use their, they don't have a skill in elevator repair kind of thing, or mechanical or whatever. Um, Mechanics, it would be the skill. So what they try to do is they roll a 20-sided die, and they're going to need to roll 4 or under to succeed in getting themselves unstuck from the elevator kind of thing, or getting it started again, whatever the DM would happen to come up with on the spot, and rapport with the players. And then kind of in the same vein, you can see over here, I've added these were going to be my totals. So once I did that, I rolled for my age and I got 26. So I'm fairly youthful. And you're supposed to actually decide what year you're starting in the 1930s. I set it as if I were going to start in 1932. That could vary by game session, or if you wanted to do a whole campaign, you would start in a particular year. I just happened to pick 1932, but then you can count back to decide how old your character was in 1917 during the United States involvement with World War One, and this game does assume that you're probably somebody who is originating from the United States, even if you grew up and live elsewhere. In fact, their example character was born in the U.S., but then moved and was raised in India and has moved back and forth at several points in time. And that's part of how they justify the skills they chose and what kind of backstory they came up with for their character. So then from that, and I just wanted to show you this group statistic. So here we're looking at the attributes, and then this is how you determine your attribute group. So where the attribute falls in this kind of number range, then you know that it is going into this group range. And in some cases, this would connect up with an effect die, and that would be, when you're calling for a roll based on a particular group, and it doesn't specify a die, and you need to know which roll, it's going to be this die that comes down here with your effect die that's associated to the group number. And there again, I understand these are just a lot of numbers and die roll calls that won't make a lot of sense until you actually go through it. And I think the one thing I'd probably try to assure somebody who's thinking of whether or not they actually want to get involved with this game is, again, if you look at it, it all gets written down on a very small section of this character sheet. We're going to look at the skills section too, and those also come with numbers. But these are things that are recorded on the sheet, and then you look back at later when you need them. So anyway, I did my profile for the talents, and then I rolled my 2d6 and added 20 and got a number 28. That's how I assigned my permanent scores over here, taking into account that I would need to go, like I assigned 5 to the permanent column here. That's because I knew my profile gave me a -1, so I had to start with 4. And I basically made everything pretty even and gave myself a bonus in the best area I had, which was combative. And we'll see when I get to the skills that I have made him sort of a brawler. So then the next thing we did after that was, now that we have my age is 26, we also know then that I have 26 development points to work with. And I decided to reserve 6 of those dice for additional attributes points, and I rolled a 25 on my 6x6 roll. So I had my initial 75 points plus 25 points, so I get to 100 points to distribute then across all of my 6 attributes, and these are the final numbers I came up with. And then of course my attribute saving throw becomes that number divided by 2, round down, and the critical saving throw comes to this number divided by 3, round down, so I can determine all that. And again, that's then set, and I don't have to worry about it. So then my combat dodge ability, my major defensive score, is going to be the deafness group. Again, go back to group numbers, and my deafness is 17. That falls in group 3. My speed is also 17. That falls in group 3. So that's 6 total divided by 2. My combat dodge ability then is going to be 3, and we'll find that like when other people attack me, I'm going to get to deduct those 3 points of my combat dodge ability from their attempt to hit me. And that's something that we'll really go over more in the next video when we talk about combat and damage and healing and that sort of thing. And then also we have the damage resistance total. That's my health plus my strength divided by 2 plus my will divided by 2 gives me 34 points. Now, there are different kinds of damage in the game. Lethal damage is like it sounds. It's the stuff that's going to kill you. Subdual damage counts against your total, but it's something that you can rebound from much faster with like a rest period or whatever. Critical damage tends to be damage that's focused in an area and would potentially deny you the use of, like we're talking about, if you couldn't use your dominant hand, that might be from some sort of critical damage. And there are, of course, ways to heal from such damage, but the important thing that we'll talk about now is when you get to half of this score, then you are considered seriously wounded, and essentially what happens is you lose a couple points from off your deafness and your speed, and then you also suffer a -4 penalty to your basic chance of success. And now we're going to get to talking about, that's the BCS score. That's probably the key to this, and we'll talk about that more then once we get into these skills. So everyone will start with American culture, American history, an initial score, and we can kind of talk about how initial scores are determined. Plus, you also start with an initial doubled score in the English language. So, for scores, or for the skills, you see, all the skills are listed here, and they all start off with, like, you can see at the top, the acrobat skill is deafness plus speed plus your natural talent. And the very first attribute listed in this case of acrobat would be deafness, is the key attribute or key statistic for that particular skill. So what you do then is I had to do my culture score, which is going to be knowledge, or culture skills, I'm sorry. So my culture score for American is going to be wit plus my aesthetics talent base and my communications talent base. And so that winds up, being 14 for wit, and then 4 for communicative, and 4 for aesthetic. And so I got 22 points in that. And that winds up being also what I get in English language. It's kind of coming from a different score. Language is under the knowledge section, and you have to specify a language, but then you can calculate it by taking wit plus communications plus aesthetics, the latter two being from your talent pool, and that gives you those initial starting skills that code to everyone. Then I had 20 points to work with, and so I kind of went through, started thinking about what I wanted my character to be, and I decided that he's a young guy who is working as a taxi driver, and that turned out to be fortuitous because he did pretty well on the starting money, and we'll get to that in a second. And I gave him then skills in mechanic. In this case, it would be automobile mechanics primarily, and navigation, because he's going to need that if he's a taxi driver. I also gave him stealth and forensic science, law enforcement, and business, which is something that he's keeping track of as far as running his taxi cab work right now. But he's not using his own vehicle, so he's working for a taxi cab company. But just to get to that in a second, also gave him lots of fighting talent because he did pretty well on the combative talent, and is decent as far as strength and deafness and speed and health. And so I gave him brawling and improved that twice. I also gave him pistol and knife and nightstick, although I think I'm going to have him more focus on the sap than just the nightstick. But the basic idea is that he's working and doing fairly well for himself as a taxi cab driver working for a taxi company, because he ended up, when he rolled his money, we'll talk about that right now. So you roll money by, you'll look at this table a lot. It's called the non-player character reaction table, or sometimes just the reaction table, and it's a 1 to 100 kind of roll that's broken down into different categories. You can see, like poor and very poor, both part bracketed into this poor category in this value number column. Anyway, you just you roll this on this table a lot, not always for a non-player character reaction, but it's actually used as the base roll, and then you refer to something else on another table. In this case, it's going to be the money table. So I made my roll very high here. I think I rolled a 96, if I remember correctly. No, that was for my looks. Whatever it was, I rolled very high, and that put me on the money table here. I ended up being on the +4 column. So I got myself $600 in starting money by rolling a d10 and multiplying that by 100. I found out that I had $4,500 in savings. Again, rolling a d10 multiplied by 500. Found out I had a salary of D10 times 1,000. It's going to be $5,000 a year, which is actually doing very well for himself in 1932. I also had a 50% chance, and you can see all these scores, it gets progressively better depending on which column you end up in. You roll for three things: the chance of having your own car, I did not. The chance of having your own house, a small one, I did not. The chance of owning a gun, I did not, even though I've taken pistol as one of my skills. And they also had a 25% chance of having a special vehicle. Now it says yacht or small plane. Small plane might work. I wouldn't have gone with a yacht. I might have gone with a small fishing boat, or that kind of, maybe a speedboat. But I also did not roll under 25 or 25% or less. So I ended up not having any of the property categories, but I also don't have any debt there either. So it turns out that I would have liked to have maybe rolled to have a pistol to start off with, but what we can do then is we would deal with that during the game. Maybe I'm getting in touch with my my contacts on the street, or my law enforcement contacts, kind of thing, to see if I could find me a gun. So anyway, just as the other skills that I took stealth driver, mechanic, navigation, business, law enforcement, forensic science, brawling knife, nightstick pistol, as I kind of talked about. And the idea is that although he's working and making good money as a taxi driver, he really wants to become a private detective. And part of the reason for this is during his off hours, he's working as a part-time driver for an old detective who can't get around as much anymore, a private detective kind of thing. And so that detective is kind of occasionally giving him, tips and tricks of the trade that he's picking up as he goes along, although he still works primarily as a taxi cab driver, but that gives him all sorts of contacts around town and that sort of thing too. So now I've come up with some ideas for what my character is going to be about. Some of the last things we got to roll for, and some people will like this more than others. So we go through all those things. You can deal. There's an advanced area called aging, and since my character is so young, it wouldn't be applicable to him. But starting at 40, you start having to worry about making progress more slowly as far as raising your attributes and that kind of thing. We'll talk about that at the very end. I rolled for my money. I've started thinking about my background. I also have to roll for my looks and my height and my weight. Now, this is one of those things called the physical aspects chart, and basically it does mention that if you have something that you really want your character to look like, or have a physical image already in mind, you can kind of do that. But it's, otherwise you would roll for it. And I choose to roll separately for height and weight. And the way this works is then I rolled, and I actually rolled high. And then for my second one, I rolled average. So in this case, that doesn't give me the second roll is just a shift. So basically, I ended up picking from the same column. It didn't really affect me much at all anyway. But that was just how the roll shook out. If I had rolled, say, -1 or +1, then instead of I would use the high range for my height, but I would have used, potentially either one category higher or one category lower, for example, or as much as three. Although clearly, if I'd been on high and rolled, a 3 weight shift, I could have only gone up to the highest category. So that's all you really would have to do. And there again, the weights are in kilograms. And then the last thing you roll for is your looks, and that goes from ugly, homely, mediocre, average, good looking, comely, and handsome. And I did, in fact, roll mediocre looks for myself. So he's 6'4", weighs 95 kilograms, but is mediocre in terms of looks. So a little bit below average. And that might come up, during the game kind of thing. And then that's really kind of it. I have some money so I can buy gear. Obviously, you can work with your GM over whether or not you should um, plan to buy gear ahead, or if you're going to do a shopping trip at the very beginning of the adventure, or some mixture of the two. Maybe you could buy some basic kit, but things that were important, like in my case, I need to rustle up a pistol if I'm going to have one. Perhaps I would, get my camping equipment if I wanted to have that in the trunk, but the pistol thing I need to work out on my own. And I think for now, um, that's probably all we'll talk about. I think I've probably said enough about the task system in terms of taking time. Maybe I guess the last thing we talk about is just the nature of the hero. It does give you some ideas in here about what could be your hero's motivation, and the usual ones might be revenge or altruism. You just want to be a hero and help out the weak and helpless, or you just like the challenge, or it's part of your work. Like say you're a police detective and you're solving crimes. It's just part of what you do. And then there's also the method of how your character kind of goes about it. And there the categories are vigilante, lawman, man of mystery, the mastermind, and the sidekick. And for like altruistic hero kind of thing, they very much abide by a code. Although this is sort of like the alignment system. Although you don't get penalized for not following alignment, or doing something that deviates from your code. But if you can play with a code, and with some characters it makes more sense, and others it may not be that big a deal for you. So it's not as binding as D&D's alignment system, but it's there. In my character's case, I might actually think of him as a sidekick as far as his um, methods for now, because I've already specified that he's working under the tutelage of an old private detective who can't get around as well anymore. So he's on his off hours driving this guy around, helping him solve crimes. But maybe eventually he would like to work up his way till he becomes, a hero in his own right, kind of thing. In which case that would, again, things like the methods, they're not really binding. They're basically just to give you role playing ideas. Anyway, like I said, in the next video, what we'll talk about is time, my time management, how time affects choices that you can make at different scales in the game. We'll talk about damages and combats, and how to run those, and how to figure out whether you hit and how much damage you take. and then lastly we'll deal with healing, and then after that we'll kind of deal with a lot of the cleanup categories that would get us ready to play. And again, like I said, I know I've kind of beat this idea to death, but I really want to make the point that even after this long video of me probably rambling too much, um, I mean, really, just look look again at this small area of numbers that you've written down, and they remain stable through the sessions. So there's really not that much that you have to think about continually recalculating during the game. It's basically going to come down to the GM saying, "Hey, I need you to roll a such and such," and so just I guess this is the last part. So talking about skills, they go from 1 to 100, and you raise them, points at a time, one to a few points at a time. During downtime, it's usually 1 week or 1 month, depending on what you're trying to do. Basically, to raise an attribute, you have to spend a month of downtime working on it. To get a new skill, an initial score in a new skill, you would have to spend a month. But then to improve skills that you already have, you calculated at 1 week at a time. Although it can be fractional, because you can learn 2 skills over a week, or you can learn one and teach one, or you can teach two. Basically, all you need to be a teacher in a particular skill is you have to have a higher level in that skill than your potential student. Okay, so even though the scores are from 1 to 100, the basic chance of success is determined by taking the total score in that skill and dividing it by 5. And then you're going to get, some sort of number that's from 1 to 20. And that is going to be used to determine on a d20 roll whether you're successful at anything during a game. Now, there could be modifiers, penalties or bonuses, one way or the other, that are determined per incident or per scenario, depending on what you're up against or what other factors are involved. But that's your base chance of success. It's going to be your score again for 1 to 100 divided by 5 becomes your BCS in that particular skill. Anyway, that's certainly got to be enough for now. I thank you very much for listening to all this, and hopefully you'll come back at the next one when we talk about combat and time and healing rates and types of damage and that sort of thing. Thank you very much.